Thank you for joining us today for the Food Equality Initiative's conversation on food laws, college dining. I'm Karen Palmer, I'm your moderator for today, and I'm also a food allergy parent and advocate and the founder of Karen Palmer Coaching. Food Equality Initiative is the nation's leading organization working to increase access to allergy-friendly and gluten-free foods for the individuals who need them most. So on behalf of everyone today, I'd like to thank the staff of FEI for making today's conversation possible, and also to thank the founder of FEI, Emily Brown, for creating this series of discussions that's designed to empower and educate the food allergy and celiac communities. Over the next hour, we'll discuss laws that pertain to on-campus living and dining for students with food allergy and celiac, how college students and parents should prepare for the transition to dining away from home, and who students can turn to for guidance and support as they figure out how to dine safely at school. So let me briefly introduce today's guests. We'll start with them individually and then come together in the back half of the hour for some group conversation. With us today are Amelia Smith, General Counsel and Vice President of Civil Rights Advocacy for FAACT, the Food Allergy and Anaphylaxis Connection Team. Caroline Moassessi, who is the Vice President of Community Relations, also for FAACT. Terri Brownlee, the Director of Nutrition and Wellness for the Appetit Management Company. And Imani Magure, a 2021 graduate of Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you all for being here with us today. We're going to start with Amelia. So first, just a little bit more about her background. In addition to her work with FAACT, she also maintains a private law practice in her home state of Mississippi. And she is the proud mother of a 13-year-old son with food allergies and asthma, and a daughter who is presently navigating her first year in college, thriving with disabilities of her own. So welcome again, Amelia. I would love to start by giving everybody an idea of the legal landscape here. So would you share your thoughts on the most important existing laws that govern dining and living arrangements for students with food allergy and celiac?
Sure. Thanks for having me today, Karen. First, I think it's important that everyone understands that food allergies can be considered a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Amendment Act of 2008, as they are a physical impairment that limits one or more major life activity. Individuals with food allergies are at risk for anaphylaxis, a life-threatening condition that can significantly impact the major life activity of breathing. Food allergies may also significantly limit other major life activities, such as eating, and can impact major bodily functions, such as the immune system, the digestive system, the bowel, respiratory system, circulatory system. Title II and Title III of the ADA prohibits schools from discriminating against students with disabilities. The ADA also requires schools to provide students with disabilities reasonable accommodations necessary for those students to have full and equal access to the school's services, facilities, accommodations, including housing, and goods, including food services and meal plans. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 places similar restrictions against discrimination on schools receiving federal funds. So now that you have an idea of how food allergies can be considered disabilities and the legal protections that this affords, we now turn to some legal settlements and resolutions to see how these laws have been interpreted. The first major settlement dealing with food allergies in college and university is the Lesley University settlement. Lesley University had a requirement that all students living on campus pay for a meal service plan, regardless of the ability of students with food allergies and celiac to safely eat the food provided. So where did we end up there? Lesley University and the Department of Justice entered into a voluntary settlement agreement that requires Lesley to consider exempting from mandatory meal plan purchase students who, due to a disability, cannot fully utilize the meal service plan. Lesley was also required to modify its meal service plan so that students with food allergies can safely participate in meals served. This includes training dining service staff on how to properly accommodate students with food allergies, posting warning notices regarding allergens in foods that contain allergens, offering safe food items to students with food allergies, allowing food allergic students to pre-order safe meals from dining services, and also provides a separate area to store safe food and prepare safe meals. The next major settlement is the Rider University settlement. Rider University contracted with an outside vendor for their food service. This outside vendor failed to appropriately accommodate a student with celiac disease. It also failed to appropriately train its food staff service to safely accommodate students with celiac and food allergies. The Rider settlement made with the Department of Justice stands for the premise that a college or university cannot rely on the limited policies of its outside food vendor. The responsibility to safely accommodate students still falls on the school itself. Under this settlement agreement, Rider University was required to make structural changes to its food services to provide allergen-free food preparation areas in dining facilities. It was required to create a pre-order option for students with food allergies and to employ a full-time dietitian to advise and assist with addressing issues related to food allergies. And the last complaint that we're going to look at today involves the State University of New York at Potsdam. The complaint was filed with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, who enforces Section 504, alleging that SUNY failed to appropriately accommodate a student with a disability by charging an additional fee for a medical single dorm room, like a private room. The SNUI resolution stands for the premise that if a student requires and is provided, and that's a key issue here as well, a medical single housing option under Section 504, the school may not impose a surcharge or additional fee for this necessary accommodation, and the student must be charged the same rate as standard housing. Now, it's important to note that this resolution involved a student with a disability other than food allergies, but it can be interpreted to apply to students with any disability that requires a medical single accommodation.
So if I could interrupt for a second, Amelia, I mean, this is, a pretty, large universe that's covered here. We've dealt with the issue that dining plans need to accommodate students with food allergy and celiac, with the idea that universities are ultimately responsible for the food and the training provided via private vendors in providing food for students, and that there can be an entitlement if the correct conditions are met for students with food allergy and celiac, certainly at a severe level, to have separate single accommodations. These are individual cases. Can people draw any inference regarding their own specific situations because these cases exist? What do people need to be reminded about in terms of their own students' issues?
Well, it is important to note that these are out here because, yes, they do show that these accommodations are appropriate in some cases for individuals with disabilities, whether they be food allergy, celiac, or another disability. But it's also important to note, just as Mary Vargas said in the part 1 of this food law webinar, that the facts are very important. Mary said that she takes cases based on facts and she wants them to have good facts. So it is very important that you get your facts out there as a student who needs these accommodations, because just as in K through 12 school settings, every individual needs different accommodations. You can have the same allergy, be the same age, and need different accommodations. So it's very important to focus on your individual need and why you need the accommodations. It's also important to note that these are, resolutions with the Office of Civil Rights and settlements with the Department of Justice. These have not actually been tried in court. So there is no legal precedence involving these matters. That said, a lot of universities and colleges, thankfully, are looking at these as precedents and knowing that, if they don't follow the tenets of these resolutions and settlements when they're appropriate, then they're very likely going to be hit with a DOJ or OCR complaint of their own, which they don't want. So it is important, again, to stress your individual needs and why you need your accommodations, even though that these are there. This is kind of a starting point.
Thank you for spelling that out. One other thing that I want to make sure that we touch on up front is that one thing that families may not be thinking of in advance of their child's transition to college is the idea that once your child turns 18, they're in a completely different legal category. Now they're adults. So what kind of legal paperwork protections do families need to think about putting in place before their student leaves for school?
There really are three main documents that we encourage families to look at and look into having prepared. The first is the healthcare power of attorney or healthcare proxy. This document is important so that you as a parent can remain informed about your child's health and also be able to make healthcare decisions for your child if they are not, especially in the case of a severe reaction. The second document is a durable legal power of attorney. And of course, I encourage this for any parent of any child going to college, because this allows you to access your student's financial information. It allows you to pay bills, handle insurance matters, take care of these legal matters on behalf of your child who is now a legal adult. And then, of course, finally, the third document is a FERPA release. And a FERPA release is necessary to access your student's educational records. And more importantly, this is what allows you as a parent to discuss your child's accommodations with the Disability Services Office on campus or the other school departments. My daughter being a freshman in college, we have a FERPA release in the main registrar's office for her educational records, but we also have a FERPA release with the Disability Services Office so that I can contact them. It is, most DSOs or student success centers or whatever they're called on campus prefer to speak directly with the student. But we all know that there are times where students may not feel comfortable putting themselves out there, especially at first in their freshman year. And so this allows you to step in and assist your student if necessary.
Oh, thank you so much. There is so much more that we could continue with right now, but I want to save it for the group discussion. We're going to circle back around. I would love to turn now to Caroline. Caroline Moassessi is FAACT's Vice President for Community Relations and a driving force behind the creation of FAACT's online college resource center. She's a lifelong food allergy advocate who's worked on state and national legislation, school policy, community food allergy awareness, and she also recently launched her second child with food allergies and asthma off to college this fall. So thank you for being here, Caroline.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to FEI and you for having this conversation, because this is such a stressful time. Kindergarten is that first level of release from parenthood to passing the baton to the child, and this is the next step, and it can be incredibly stressful. So this kind of conversation, I think, is just critical. So thank you for having us here and having this discussion. I'm going to just briefly go through the three stages of the college exploration process and actually getting and launching your child to college. So the first phase is actually exploration, and that's getting started. So that's when you take your child and you start looking at schools, looking at big schools, little schools, city schools, schools in the country, all over. You're basing the choices and decisions on your student's passion. But at the same time, this is when you should also be looking at dining services and housing and food allergy accommodations. And so as you're touring colleges or doing online tours and inquiring about the school, start asking, is there food allergy policy in place for dining services, for academics, for housing? And then let's just say your student's creating their list and they find the perfect school, but the food service might not be where they want it to be, or it just might not look very secure. This is the time that you want to sit down with your student and have a quick talk and say, all right, let's look at this. Because if you have passion for the school, but food service is off, now there's a safety issue that has to be balanced out. But what if you find a school that has fabulous food service, food allergen policy in place, and they're just, doing incredibly well with it. But there's nothing at the school. And so what you have to do is weigh out that passion. And I'll just throw in my own personal opinion here. But if the student tries to go to a school they're not passionate about, the ability for them to be successful is just going to crash. But you don't have to stop there. And I'm going to actually just give you a quick story about my son. He was interested in two schools, top schools, choices for him. He ended up going to one of them. And their food service information on food allergy was very minimal. So he actually reached out to the admission officers at both schools and said, can I have a meeting? Because I want to apply at your school, but I can't apply if I can't be physically safe. And so the admissions officers at both schools were taken back, pleasantly surprised, and actually was thrilled that he wanted a meeting. And one of them said they'd never had been interviewed by a student before. And after the discussion at the first school, they said that their disabilities office is just being formed. And so they actually don't have protocol in place, but if he was to apply and attend, they would work on it. And could he help them? And then the second school said a similar thing too. We have some protocol in place, but clearly it's not strong enough. So if you do attend, we'll see what we can do. So the moral of that story is, if you find your perfect school, don't give up, start asking. But during that exploration stage, this is your big opportunity to get out there and start asking questions, talk to the admin officers, see if you can go in and watch food service and talk to people there. And then one last point on the exploration process too, is pause with your student and look at their ability to communicate, because the gold that keeps all of this glued together is your student's ability to communicate. Now, they don't have to be extroverted, but they've got to be able to know how to write an email, how to follow up, how to speak to an adult or a stranger, how to maneuver an uncomfortable situation. So that's just a little nugget there for that exploration stage. Now, the next stage is when your students hopefully admitted and everyone's celebrating, yay. And that's so exciting. And here's my recommendations. As soon as your student presses send and accepts, the next thing they do after cheering with the family and eating pizza and so forth is going right back to their laptop and typing a letter to the disabilities office and getting an appointment set. And you want to do that immediately, because you want to set up a meeting and start talking to them. And the first thing you want to ask is, what do I need? What information do I need? Records, physicals, forms to get these accommodations. And that can take time, because your student may need to go to their doctor and have a physical. They may need to have refreshed allergy testing. There's a lot that takes place in there, and that can take weeks. So you immediately want to get in there and ask, what do I need? When do you need it by? And then another giant question to ask is, who is my champion? Because things go wrong, and they will. And I mean, this is life. And so for your student to know who is their main contact at school, that if something goes belly up in dining services or something goes belly up with housing or in a class, who in that disability office can they reach out to? So that's
Carolyn, if I might interrupt here for a second.
Absolutely.
This is such a critical point. And I have spoken to students who did not do that as a first early part of the process. What don't you have if you don't have the knowledge and support of the Disability Services Office?
What you are basically floating on an island alone, and it's incredibly stressful. And so you really do need their support, because you need the legal power behind you, because the disabilities office knows that they have legal obligations, but often other people on campus don't realize that. And so by you connecting back with that disabilities office and having that champion there, I don't know, the way I look at it is they're the backstop. They're the ones who are going to say, okay, well, stop here. But also too, if you can also create supporters within that system that aren't necessarily in the disabilities office. Just an example back to my son, dining services were his hugest allies and the people who were feeding him. So it is really good to make your contacts and understand. And on that note, with contacts, in this one initial call with the disabilities office, you want to find out, who are your contacts in every area? So who's the dining services contact? Who's your housing contact? And if you're doing athletics, who's the contact there? And as soon as you get those contacts, again, set up those meetings right away. People take vacations during the summer. And so when you might be ready to talk, they may be out of the country. So you really want to get in there quickly, talk to dining services in particular. And when you speak to them, you want to ask them things like, what is your protocol? What can I expect? Here are my allergens. What can I expect? Bring me through what my day would look like. Do I text you? Do I walk in and talk to a manager? Do you already have, a top 8 free bar? And really go through and get a feel for that. And there's a lot more questions you can ask, and I'll direct you over to the FAACT website, because in our College Resource Center, we actually have checklists for both the parent and the student, and those include questions. And those checklists are for each of these phases. But there's a lot more questions where you go into great depth. But the whole point is to really get those accommodations established. As soon as you accept and you're done celebrating, start working on that, because it is going to take weeks to get you through. And then the last phase of this is actually move-in ready. So you're accepted, you're getting ready to move in. Again, about a month out, 3 weeks out, reach out to the disabilities office and just confirm everything's in place. If you can, meet with the food service ahead of time before everyone arrives to campus. But this is your moment to just confirm that everything's in place and you've got everything in order. And honestly, the last step in there too is just recognizing and helping your student understand that they will become the experts at Pivot, that when something goes wrong, it's okay because they're prepared. And so just a short example of that is you get to campus and maybe food service is a little chaotic. Well, when you move in, bring in all that food for sandwiches and oatmeal in your room and things that you can microwave. Have a little plan B ready so that if maybe there's a challenge in food service, you've got stuff in your fridge or local restaurants that are safe. But overall, you have these different steps, but the most important key to me is being that pivot expert and then having that communication ability. And again, maybe it's just writing emails and your student doesn't want to speak to someone face to face or not comfortable with that. That's fine. Just be really good at writing emails.
This is terrific, Caroline, and we're definitely going to come back and revisit some of these points in the back half. This is all clearly the voice of experience, so we appreciate all of those little touches. I want to bring in Terri Brownlee now, and just to give a little background here, Terri is a registered dietitian nutritionist. She is the Director of Nutrition and Wellness for the Bon Appetit Management Company. Her experience spans from private practice and corporate consulting to food service and nutrition education. So in her current role, she directs strategic wellness programming for colleges, businesses, and specialty venues nationwide. She manages a team of chefs and registered dietitians who work closely with the operators in Bon Appetit's cafe network to keep food allergic guests safe and happy. So thank you for being here, Terri.
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm hearing a lot of things that I would say as well.
Well, this is your shot. I mean, I want to ask you when, and be as specific as you can, when would you appreciate hearing from students who need information on eating safely on campus with food allergies or celiac?
Well, I say the earlier the better, early and often. Check in, even during the admissions process. I think it's great. We love to have those conversations and start letting students know, if they're considering one of our schools, what is there, because each university is different. Each campus has slightly different facilities, slightly different resources. And so while we have protocols that kind of, span across and give consistent services, we also have a lot of customizations that happen on each campus. So we want to give students a chance to really work through those. But at the latest, I agree with Caroline. Once you're admitted and you're making that decision, that's when to start working with us. And we would say go to Disability Services Office first, and then they can either connect you to us, or all of our dining websites have our contact information on them as well. So we have a little contact us button if you're attending one of our schools, and it'll take you directly to our chef, our general manager, and there is an Ask the Dietitian tab on all of our dining services that comes directly to me. So I parse those out to whomever they need to go to on campuses.
So if I can just say, I mean, you're saying as early as you can. I mean, students get accepted to schools March, April. You want to hear from students then, if they can do that. We do,
especially if there's any opportunity. If a student's going to be around during the summer, maybe post-COVID, they'll actually get to come in person and do some orientation. So not only do we want to prepare for that visit, but that is a great time to actually sit down face-to-face when we have a little bit more breathing room and start to really map out what the semester looks like. Because if you wait till the day that dining services opens, we're opening restaurants like they're brand new every single year on college campuses. And so it does get a little chaotic at the beginning of the semester. We'd rather have you at least have some starting plans in place that can be modified. And that's another point I like to say about any plans we put in place. We just encourage students not only to set an initial plan, but keep that line of communication open, because if something isn't working, we can make modifications. There's always another solution. There's always something else we can do to help support your students' needs on campus.
So this is great. I mean, everyone has spoken about the need for, fluid communication back and forth. From the food service perspective, who are the key players that students need to connect with on your team as they figure out how to eat safely on campus?
Yeah, it's usually our general manager and executive chef. And oftentimes our chef will take over the main communication piece because they're actually going to be the one that either accepts that text message or is the one that's checking the email for things like, personalized plates and special preparation methods. And all of our chefs are, we put all of our managers through a FAIR certified training. And so they are very well versed in handling all the really basic allergen needs. And then they all have resources on my team that they can call on if things are a little more complicated or they feel like they need some extra support. So our accommodations span from things as simple as just talking to students, and then the student really gets all the information they need to self-navigate, up to, really almost a concierge service on some campuses, and to meet some people's needs where we know that the student needs special meals prepared, and we actually do that on a one-off basis.
So it did sort of continue on a theme to give people an idea of what types of meal choices might be available to support students with food allergy or celiac, understanding that each dining service is going to offer on different campuses different options. What does Bon Appetit offer? What kinds of things could people be looking for if they have, food needs that have to be accommodated?
Well, in some of the more streamlined cases, it is just a matter of making sure the student understands, what are the items that are there always, what are their backup meals that they can always choose no matter what. And then knowing how to navigate the specials. Our menus change every day. So just knowing who to ask to get real-time information if they're not clear about something. Then from there, we also have, depending on the needs on a campus, we have certain dedicated areas. Most of our campuses now have made without gluten areas because that's a very, very large constituency on many college campuses. And we've expanded that into made without the major 8, and now we're adding sesame and gluten into that as well. So many of our campuses have those areas. And I'm really excited about a new concept we came up with during COVID that I'm trying to really push out there. And that is a platform that operates on our mobile ordering platforms that allows students to actually select their dietary pattern. And once they do, their choices are filtered to foods that are just safe for that diet. And they don't have to really try to navigate and figure out what that is.
So, I mean, the message here is that, there is innovation going on in this area. And so students and families need to be aware that they can ask, what is the range of ways in which I could access a meal? Because the, sort of thought process might be, I have to wait to get to the cafeteria to find out what's available. If there's a mobile app or something that they can use back in their room, they can plan. And that actually leads me to my last thought before, we move on. Since we're still dealing with a very fluid situation as regards COVID, what should students know and prepare for regarding the impact of any potential quarantine situation and how that would affect their dining needs?
Well, all of our quarantine situations take into account any special dietary needs. So most of our schools, if a student needs to go into a quarantine situation, they're going to get some type of information to fill out to let us know what their needs are. And so we're making those types of accommodations even through quarantine.
So the message there would be, as Caroline and Amelia have both referred to, as part of this due diligence that you as the student are doing, this is a question you need to ask along with all the other things, because again, the situation is so fluid, anything could change. Be prepared, have your go bag ready, and know how you're going to get a safe meal.
Absolutely.
So this is super helpful. I'm going to pull in Imani Magure here. Imani is a 2021 graduate of Washington University in St. Louis. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And she's currently in the Marketing Leadership Development Program at GE Healthcare. Imani has managed multiple food allergies since birth and also has family members with life-threatening allergies. So very happy you could be with us today, Imani, to kind of provide us with a student perspective on this experience.
Thank you for having me.
So Caroline talked a bit about, the process of working through how to choose a university. For you, how much of a role did the ability to, eat safely play in your selection process, and how did you work it?
Absolutely. It played a large role later on in the process. I would say early on, when I was visiting schools across campus throughout my high school years, I would visit campuses and I would try to walk through the cafeteria and the dorms just to get a sense of what the situation could be like and use that later in my decisions of would I apply to this college or not. But I wasn't necessarily having conversations that early on. Those happened later once I got my acceptances and narrowed my list down. I had two schools towards the end that I was very interested in and talked to dietitians on both campuses and started to get a feel for what the avenues would be to eat safely on those said campuses.
And when you had those conversations after committing, what did you look at as being your first steps towards really being able to make a decision and say, I feel safe with this place?
Yeah, so one campus definitely stood out to me over the other. Washington University obviously ended up being the one I chose. And when I spoke with the dietitian, she made the accommodations very clear to me. She said, we have, you can order food ahead of time through an online application. And then all the food service members were trained on food allergies. They didn't carry EpiPens. That would be my responsibility, but they were aware that students have allergies and look out for signs of students who may be having a reaction and being aware of that. And so that was one thing early on. She welcomed any questions I had. She checked in with me once I enrolled in the school and started monthly to make sure everything was going smoothly and that there were no issues. And if there were issues, how could she help me solve them sooner rather than later before it became a larger problem?
That's fantastic. It sounds like a very proactive approach.
Yes, for sure.
So what did you learn? Because again, it's always a different experience in the preparing than it is in the arrival. What did you learn that surprised you once you actually arrived on campus?
I think one thing for me is I was very aware that there are multiple dining service options on campus. Obviously, there's not one main cafeteria. You may be on one end of a campus and you don't want to travel back to your dorm to get food. And so I wanted to make sure that I could eat in every single location. And there were some locations that are smaller. And so making sure and being aware that there would be an option in every single campus eatery, whether that be a small grab and go salad. And so I made that, I brought that up in those early meetings to say, hey, is there an option to have smaller grab and go options, even if it's not a main campus eatery with physical staff there would be an option for me to eat.
I mean, that's really important to take into account that, a lot of people certainly might not have occurred to me early in the process. If you're at a school with a very big physical campus where it might take you half an hour, 40 minutes to navigate from one end to the other, and you have classes that are close together, it also goes back to Caroline's point about, sometimes you just want to make sure that you stock your own refrigerator with things to carry if you're going to end up with a very packed schedule one day. And, there are just times when, you can't get the accommodation you might want in the location you're in. So that's a really, really helpful point. Thinking about the living situation and how it impacts dining, how did you handle choosing a roommate and, putting that situation on the table, what your needs would be in your living space?
I talked with residential life early on to say I have allergies. Is this something that can go into my profile when assigning roommates? And so they were able to take that into account. I had a random roommate. And then once I was given her name, I reached out to her immediately to tell her, I have these allergies. I'm hoping you're willing to accommodate them, not bring my allergens into the room. I'm fine if you eat them outside of our room in common spaces, but if you would please keep those out of our rooms. And she was very welcoming to that. She always made sure her hands were washed before she would come into our room, because obviously you have communal spaces in your room, whether that be desk chairs, pillows, TVs. And so she was very aware and cognizant that I had these allergies. And not everyone is that lucky, but I think starting the conversation as soon as you're assigned that roommate or you choose your roommate, to make that awareness that please don't bring these in the room, it may cause an inadvertent reaction.
So that's, a huge point and something that clearly you made very explicit. The idea that this is a conversation that needs to take place before you, show up together, because there are things to think about. Are we going to share a refrigerator and a microwave? Or, what happens if I go away for a few days? Are you going to be careful about who comes into the room while I'm not there? So that's very important to distinguish. What other questions do you think that students might not think to ask in advance that would impact their process?
I think one thing is there are opportunities outside of being on campus. And so one thing I was able to do in college was study abroad. And I brought that up early in my college experience. This is something I want to do. Let me start doing the research to find locations that work with the major I'm going to choose in locations that can accommodate food allergies. And obviously not every country understands them as well. And so being able to think early ahead of what opportunities you may want to do later down the line, start thinking about those earlier rather than later.
That's fantastic. And it also sounds like, once again, in sort of keeping with the theme that everybody has brought out, that the student is really going to be her own best advocate, that's something you would want to raise directly with the study abroad office when you put yourself forward as a candidate for that program, so that they stay dialed in with disability services and they can communicate directly with their counterparts wherever you might end up overseas. So before we sort of go into group conversation, what do you think is the most important thing that students have to understand about how to handle this process of ensuring their own food safety well?
I think it's been echoed in things Caroline and Terri have said. Students are their own best advocate. You have resources in disability offices and dining services, but unless you raise your questions, you raise your problems and issues, no one's going to be coming for you to help unless you're coming at them first. And so really being aware of who your best advocate is yourself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for giving us such valuable insight into the laws, the accommodations, the support systems that students need to access when they're dealing with food allergy and celiac on campus. So at this point, I would like to open it up for everybody to really just, have some crosstalk here, because we've brought up so many things that are important. And I'd love to make sure that we're covering as many aspects of all of this as we've touched on so far. One of the things that, again, we know is an unfortunate reality of dealing, particularly with food allergy, is at some point, you may well have a reaction, a severe, emergency that has to be handled. It could be in a dining hall or anywhere on campus where food is being served. So what should students expect and how do they need to prepare? Because this is not a K-12 environment anymore. I know that I think, Imani, you actually raised the issue of, you were told early on, we don't have EpiPens in the cafeteria and our staff is not trained to assist you. So what do you need to keep in mind about how you're going to operate in this environment?
I can start off with this. When I moved into my dorm, I spoke with my RAs right away to say, I have allergies. If something happens, here's what to do. I have an EpiPen on me. Typically I had a bag. I was like, this is where it will always be in my bag. And I let some of my other floor mates know as well. And so when the situation happened that I did have a reaction and I was in the dorm, they were able to help me and call emergency services and get me that help and support I needed. But that stemmed from having been proactive and letting them know that this is my situation. And if something happens, here's what you can do to help me.
It's terrific. I'm sorry that the reaction happened, but very glad that you had a support system in place that you had taken the time to build so that you could handle it appropriately. Amelia, a thought here. Parents are used to having this type of situation dealt with in a K-12 environment where there's a principal to call and a school nurse. And what do parents need to keep in mind about what things look like now with your adult student managing reactions?
Well, of course, it's going to be different in every state. Every state law regarding stock epinephrine is going to be different. And so you really cannot count on the school or university to provide the epinephrine. You need to make sure that your student has theirs and that they still self-carry, just like we encourage in younger children. But you also need to encourage your student, as Imani said, to make sure that the people that they are going to be around the most know how to respond in a reaction. That is an accommodation that you can see through disability services, that, your RAs are trained and that someone on the food service staff is trained, not only to recognize, but also to administer the medication. But it really is going to be your student's responsibility, as Imani said, to make sure that this is handled appropriately and that the people they are around know how to react and respond. And then again, in the case of a reaction, should a reaction occur, it's very important to have that healthcare power of attorney or healthcare proxy so that you can access your child's medical information. And that helps bypass HIPAA so that you can be contacted and you can contact the provider directly, especially if your child's in college across the country and you can't get to them immediately, or my daughter's an hour and a half away. I still can't get to her immediately. I still would want to be able to talk to the emergency care provider immediately. So that not only allows that contact, but should there be some reason that your student not be able to make that decision for themselves as to the healthcare choices, then you are able to step in and make those healthcare decisions for them.
Thank you. That's super helpful to be reminded. There's so much paperwork that goes around being able to pave a student's pathway towards college. And this is not the kind of thing you want to think about at the very end of the process when it's difficult to get witnesses for different kinds of things. And is the notary public open? You want to be able to plan this out as part of the journey that you can get attended to in a way that won't give everybody grief at the end. Caroline, do you have any thoughts to add on this?
Yes, I do. And actually, during the exploration process or even admitted process, also ask what are the steps to take when an emergency takes place? Because some campuses want the students to call, what do you call it? I'm blanking out, the security. Campus, campus security. Thank you. I blanked on that. But yeah, some schools want the student to call campus security, and then campus security calls 911 because they have to open up gates and remove chains and so forth. Other schools want the student just call 911, and then the ambulance comes right to them. So I would add, definitely inquire, how should an allergic reaction or any emergency take place? Who's the first person that student should try to call and reach out to, or who they should ask their friends to reach out to?
That is super helpful. Thank you. And I think, one of the key people in that process, as Imani mentioned, is your student's resident advisor, who is the person who is going to know them in person. Perhaps that person will be the person to accompany you to the ambulance, or at least will be able to reach out to your family back at home if you have that FERPA release on file to let them know what's happening, because you as the student may not be able to actually speak to them and let them know what's happening. So, once again, the key thought here is communication and making sure that as many people as possible are involved in this process so that everyone who needs information can get it. Thinking of something separate, but equally important, if a student runs into the problem in the cafeteria where, maybe they feel like they can't find a safe meal right away, or they see something that's raising concerns for them about possible cross contact with an allergen, what should they do? And Terri, I'll direct that to you because this is in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I would say speak up immediately. The food service operations should have managers clearly right there on the floor that you can access. And if you don't see somebody immediately, just ask a server. We are very specific that we want these types of questions directed to our managers and chefs because they're the ones that really have the best information about how a food was prepared or that they can correct a process. So we want to see it immediately so that we can do something about it.
And I think there's a point that had come up in another conversation, the idea that sometimes students may think that the line servers will have detailed information. Is that or is that not the case?
The line servers are trained in food allergen awareness. There are certainly pieces of their job that they are responsible for, maintaining, reducing risk for cross contact and serving and not crossing, spoons and changing gloves and things like that. So they are trained about what food allergens are, how to, manage and reduce risk for cross contact, but they are not always the person who can actually go and pull a product out of the pantry and let a student see a label, or they might also not know something that's going on back of house that would be important. For example, if something's prepared in close proximity of something else, a manager or chef will be able to communicate that and redirect the student to a safe choice, whereas the line server might not be aware of that level of detail.
No, I mean, that's a really great thing to point out, the idea that, kitchens are dynamic environments. And so, perhaps, you move, the baking racks over to a different point, and then all of a sudden there's a potential for cross contact that a manager will know and have to deal with, but that a line server may not be up to speed on. And so that's going to alter the kinds of things that the student is used to eating. And so another message to keep in mind, just because things started out a particular way at the beginning of the year, you have to keep asking these questions, just like if you were eating in a restaurant or a hotel or any place. I mean, the point that you made earlier in the hour was we're opening restaurants brand new with the same idea every year, and that things also change during the process of the academic year.
Yeah, we aren't a manufacturing environment. So while we take, as many steps as possible to manage that cross contact, we do want to be in contact with students and be really super honest when there's things that, may be of a concern to them, or that we need to do differently for them, just so that we can make that safe. And this is, I cannot emphasize how true this is right now during COVID. I don't know how many people are aware of the number of substitutions that restaurants are experiencing, but on any given day, we're hearing from our chefs that they're getting 50, 60 products substituted, and it's happening to everybody with shortages out there. So students really need to be diligent about, anything that they're eating that's coming in a package. We may have screened it for allergens, but we may be getting something different on the dock. So we've got to work together on that really, really closely with students this year, more so than normal even.
No, that is
one thing I can piggyback on what Terri said is, FAACT, the Food Allergy Labeling Act, only applies to consumer goods, consumer labeled foods for, direct consumer sale. It doesn't apply to those products that are labeled for food service. So it is very essential that you speak to the people who know what they're giving you in the case of substitutions, because they're not labeled the same as they're labeled as the stuff you can walk into the grocery store and buy.
Well, and even on your grocery shelves, this is why, food allergen experts recommend that you check package labels over and over again, because the laws apply to what is in that box the day it was made. So, something could change in the process. Next week, the same box might have a different contents inside, and you wouldn't necessarily pick it up unless you look at that label. Many of our kitchens are handling 1,000 products. So this individual communication around products is just very, very critical for students to just constantly be checking in with us about.
Thank you both for, illuminating that, because I think people do make assumptions that because they're used to reading food labels that the product, it's going to be kind of universal and the same in every situation. And food service, manufacturing, bulk production is very different from what is going straight from the supermarket shelf into your home. And so, we can't say it enough. You are your own best advocate. If you have any questions in mind, you need to ask. I would ask, once again, I come back to the issue of surprises, because certainly as the parent of, also myself, a freshman, there have been plenty along the way. And Caroline, you've been through this process now with 2 kids. Where are the surprises that come up for you in terms of your own experience? Because this is turf well, and yet there are still always surprises.
The ones that caught us, I'd say a little slightly off guard, was the turnover. You have a plan set, it's perfect, you love that manager, they love you, and they leave for a new job, and there's a new person that comes in, and you're like, wait a minute, who are you? And so you have to restart that process again, which isn't bad. It's fine. But I think that would be the biggest surprise, is when all the plans you have laid out just pivot, and they're just natural, normal pivots. And so that to me was is the biggest surprise. And then in that same hand is just being ready for those surprises too. Just knowing, this is food allergies and we're in COVID, just like Terri was talking about supply chain issues and, just having that flexibility and that comfort level to ask questions right away. So when you do get hit with that surprise, just pause and say, okay, how am I going to problem solve this? Do I need my disabilities office to help me walk this through? Do I have an adult I need to talk to? Do I have a peer, who can talk me through this? But it's also when that surprise hits, it's just pausing and looking at who do I need to speak to? Who are the key stakeholders here? And how can I get that solved?
I mean, that's the reality of life, right? You form relationship with people and then, the people move on, they get another opportunity, they get transferred to another department. And so the message always is, you have to keep the lines of communication open enough to know that when change comes, you're going to have to keep building and rebuilding them in order to have a safe experience throughout. One thing I actually just saw that popped up in the chat, I'm often, sort of in the conversation, not necessarily looking at the chat, but this caught my eye. A parent on the line mentioned that their child was given a waiver of liability to sign when they showed up at the cafeteria for the first time. Amelia, is that something that is common? Have you seen that before?
It should not be legal, and it is something that disability services should nip in the bud immediately. The school cannot waive their liability. They cannot waive these responsibilities to adequately accommodate students. And so it is a big problem. This was the first time, thankfully, that I have seen it. This is one individual's case, but it does raise a red flag, and it would be something that I would immediately address with the DSO, as well as, if it is a larger outside vendor, going directly to someone in the corporate office of the vendor. And, if you can't get beyond the school staff there, you need to go above their heads. And that's what the DSO is there for. They are the ones familiar with the laws. So whether it be a housing situation or a food service situation, if you cannot get where you need to get with the direct office that you're dealing with, DSO should be able to help you facilitate that.
So this is another, important point, in the element of sort of surprise here, that if you as a student are asked to do anything that you are unfamiliar with, uncomfortable with, certainly anything that involves signing any document that could be used in a court of law, that you need to consult with additional people before you would put yourself in that kind of situation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, wow. There's a first time for everything. Imani, you said something that I want to pick up on. I want to make sure that we really, sort of think this through. You talk about needing to speak directly with, your friends, your fellow students about, making sure they understood your condition, how they could support you. How did you start those conversations? How did you raise that? And who did you choose and why?
Right. So it's obviously not the most comfortable conversation to have, to tell someone, hey, be careful, if you give me this, I might die. And so I had a group I went in with that was a scholarship group that I went in with. And so those were the people I did orientation with earlier than all the other freshmen. And it came up in conversations. People were just talking about themselves. I said, I have food allergies. And they said, oh, me too. And so that was great to find some people in that community who also understood. And so we talked amongst ourselves of what's the best way to help make everyone aware that in group situations, outings, these are where we carry our EpiPens. These are signs or symptoms. If we seem a little funny or a little out of it, check in with us because we might not be okay. And so I think most of these conversations happened organically. The roommate and the floor mate situations, those were a little more direct in introduction, saying, hi, my name's Imani, I have a food allergy. Please don't bring this around me or hand it to me. Don't say, hold my snack, because I might have a reaction from that. And so, but most of these conversations did happen organically as you're getting to know people. Or if someone just sits down next to you and they're eating food that you may have a reaction to, just saying, hi, it's nice to meet you. Do you mind if I move to a different table? Because right now you're eating something I'm allergic to.
Right. So, I mean, that's, you basically incorporate it into that organic, normal conversation that you have with people, because this is just part of your normal life. And so being able to develop, as Caroline said, that skill to communicate, however you do it, is going to be integral to, being able to build that support network that you need, starting with the people that you spend the most time around, who will be fellow students.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else that I haven't asked you all that you feel like it would be helpful for the folks who are watching today to know?
Well, Karen, just in looking in the chat, I see that there was a question asked about when the Office of Accommodations are the one making it difficult, saying they have no obligation to help keep students safe. What do you do? I think that's why we started out by discussing what the laws are, what is actually out there. By educating yourself on what is out there, you know what the law says, and you can. FAACT offers, we have an online civil rights advocacy resource center, just as we have the college resource center, that puts these laws, they're also in our college resource center, at your fingertips. So you can print these out and take them, because as much as we would like to say every disability services office across the country knows what the laws are and how they apply to food allergies, they don't. Just as a lot of 504 coordinators across the country don't know. We still have children in K through 12 schools where this has been something we've been beating, the drum for 10 years now, since I got involved in food allergy advocacy, where they say, we don't have to accommodate. Well, the law says you do, but unfortunately, a lot of people still are not familiar with how food allergies qualify as a disability. So it's very important that you educate yourself, and then you may have to turn around and educate people. The people at the school. And then if that doesn't work, then of course there is the Department of Justice and the Office for Civil Rights that you can reach out to and file complaints with.
Thank you. I mean, part of advocacy is education. And so the message is you have to educate yourself before you could even be in a position to educate anyone else. Know what your rights are and figure out who you need to talk to make sure that they are insured. Caroline, I see you're unmuted.
Oh, yeah. You can tell I want to say something. So I do want to just touch back again onto that communication piece, just because I've spoken to a lot of parents who, say their students terrified to speak to somebody. And I think it's really important to be very honest and realistic and identify that. And so if that's the case, then maybe look toward those emails, look toward something different, but also take into consideration the reality of your student. Like if the protocol at that school is contacting the manager and speaking to the manager, but that student is terrified of that, then realistically look at that and problem solve that. Because I've seen a lot of situations where students were endangering themselves or not getting their nutrition needs met because they just couldn't manage that protocol. And so, as a parent of a student heading to college, think about that and look at that realistically. And are those skills you can help develop at home? Or you say, you know what, I know you want to go to that school, but if you're not going to be able to talk to them, then maybe, that isn't the right space. So I really wanted to bring that up just for people to mull that over and just look at their student honestly. And again, it goes back to that problem solving, right? And being that pivot expert and being fluid.
Well, and I would add to that, I know it can get overwhelming for students if they're on a phone call or sitting in a meeting with a dietitian and a chef and a manager. It might feel a little overwhelming. So letting us know that, hey, our student would rather just meet one-on-one, we can certainly do that. We get all excited and we want everybody to, help, be in there to help, but maybe in those situations, it's better just for, one of us to sit down and meet with the student.
Well, thank you for elaborating on that, all of you, because from the different perspectives, students have different talents in terms of how they communicate, but it is important before the student leaves home to know where they might be best served by trying to beef up what they may not be best at. And so if a conversation has to be had, maybe it's being able to have the conversation by phone with a parent in the room, so that you have backup if you get stuck on a question and there's somebody there to ask, because 2 months later when you're on campus, you're going to have to figure out how to do that on your own. And so maybe the underlying message is the way that families can be most supportive is in starting these conversations as early as possible, so that you have the opportunity to do like a dry run and have practice conversation around how you're going to advocate for yourself once you get to school. I hate to stop here, but once again, the hour is absolutely flown by and we are at the end of our time for today. we could go on and on, but I really want to thank today's guests, Terri Brownlee, Imani Magure, Caroline Moassessi, and Amelia Smith, for the incredible, this is such valuable information you've shared today on behalf of everyone with food allergies and celiac disease. We'd also like to say a very special thank you to the staff of FEI for hosting this event and for FEI's continuing leadership on issues at the intersection of food allergy and food insecurity. So thank you for joining us today for Food Laws College Dining. We look forward to including you in our next conversation, which will take place on Friday, October 22nd, topic to be confirmed shortly. And until then, enjoy your Friday and the last official weekend of summer. Take care and have a safe weekend. Bye-bye.